Hello, Seaworthy community. And today I'm really excited to share with you that the podcast is a chance to experience one of the Rewire Your Brain Masterclass sessions with one of our truly gifted and visionary participants, Michael Roesslein. So please enjoy today's podcast and try to take advantage fairly quickly of this window of opportunity while it's on the podcast feed. A couple of weeks after it drops in the podcast feed, it will be archived in perpetuity as part of the Rewire Your Brain Masterclass. All right, everybody, enjoy. I'm Rob Downey, a family practice MD and Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. I'm coming to you from Seaworthy Functional Medicine in Homer, Alaska. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. Two of the most challenging things we need to address meaningfully to fully benefit from the Rewire Your Brain Masterclass principles are how do we fix the computer when we are the computer, and how do we transform trauma when engaging trauma can feel traumatic. We could not be more fortunate than to be joined today by a true expert and committed visionary in this endeavor, Michael Roesslein. Michael, thanks for your time today.
Hey, Dr. Rob, thanks for having me here. I'm looking forward to it.
Michael is an educator, producer, speaker, facilitator. He's certified in exercise science and coaching. His focus in recent years has been nervous system regulation, emotional healing, meditation, trauma-focused breathing and breath work, including training with Gabor Mate and a number of other leaders right on the edge of the wave in where this is going and making a huge difference in people's lives. I think, Michael, the greatest benefit today will be if we can address what Dr. Austin Perlmutter refers to as fixing the computer when we are the computer, and just two other objectives over the course of our conversation, helping our audience go right to those techniques where they can transform trauma, but deal with this catch-22 that many of them find that traumatic. And let's save a little time at the end if you want to talk about plant journeys as a potential way to unlock some of those dimensions of our healing.
Sure. I'm happy to help out in whatever way I can. And I think all those questions we can get to some sort of answers there.
Well, how about this first one then? So I think that Dr. Perlmutter's summary phrase is more succinct than mine. We're fixing the computer and we are the computer. But I also use this analogy with my patients over the years. They'd say, "Doc, I'm anxious," and and they'd say, "Well, I can't meditate." And I'd say, "Well, here's the challenge. You've got the anxiety." This is kind of a creepy metaphor, actually, but I'd say, uh, you're you're uh, you're seeing the situation with the anxiety goggles super glued to your face.
Mm.
And so the first step we need to take is these practices. And I think this is the brilliance of the work that you and others on this leading edge of the wave are doing, is they're helping people do this in real time.
Mm.
That's the key, right? How do they do it in the midst of their symptoms?
Yeah, it's a conundrum, not just in the health world, but even in the when I kind of switched. I don't hesitate to use the word side about going over there to do that kind of work because when I've trained almost 10 years, I trained in nutrition and functional medicine side of things, and then I switched over to that side. And what I've learned um, is that there is no side, that nothing is separate. And the people over there, and I'll say over there being like psychologists and therapists and counselors and those types, they view nutrition and fitness and wellness and this as a different side also. And then on this side, the function, even in function, especially in conventional medicine, but in functional medicine, even that's looked at as another side. So um, on both sides, the practices that tend to support us the most when we are, I'll just say, in it, are very difficult to get ourselves to do. when we're in it. And that's when people tend to be like, oh, I'm going to practice, I'm going to sit down for 30 minutes and meditate today, when they're in like this storm. And if they weren't sitting down and meditating for 30 minutes a day before they were in the storm, it's not going to, they're not going to be able to do it when they are. So it's really, if somebody's out there listening to this and they're not in a health crisis, or they're not in a mental health crisis or any of that, now's the time to really get those practices honed in when you feel like you, quote, don't need it,
Mm-hmm.
because then it becomes part of who you are and what you do, and the skill and the practice is there. So you're talking about doing it in real time, learning new things like meditation and breath work, and some somatic practices and nervous system regulation things, and all of this. When you're like really, really in it, um, you can watch videos and read books, but that's really where something like co-regulation comes into place. Like that's where having someone to be with and sit with and work with, if you have the ability to do that, whether it's a professional and it's one-on-one, or whether it's group. There's a lot of really amazing small group work being done now.
Mm-hmm.
That power of connection itself is rather healing.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a good friend. Like when I say the word co-regulation, I try not to use too much jargon that not everybody might know what that means, but it's basically anybody out there listening to this probably knows at least one person in their life that when they're around that person, they feel more calm. Or if they think about that person right now, they feel more grounded. Or it could be a
Mm-hmm.
dog. It could be an animal. It could be nature. We can co-regulate to nature. You told me before we went on air that if you're not working or with family, you're outdoors in nature, and there's a reason for that. Our nervous system's like an antenna, so it will attune to whatever we're surrounded with. And so that, I think, my first recommendation for people, if they're having trouble themselves alone trying to do XYZ practice, we were never designed to do these things alone, or do
Mm-hmm.
life alone, or do any sort of healing alone. And so I would recommend, you know, either working with someone or in a small group, or there's support networks or groups or in communities, a good friend, a pet, nature, and feel how your nervous system changes. For the person who's trying to like sit in their house and meditate, maybe go to a park, let your feet be in the grass, be in the ground. Maybe go, I mean, you're in Alaska, so it's probably pretty easy to go more than a park. But if you're in a city, a park or a yard, ask a friend to go have coffee with you, and just notice how your nervous system and how your body feels when you're with the other person or the other environment or the other place, and learn that about yourself. And then either practice things from there with them or in those places, or just, it's even possible right now to think of a place that, I'm sure you have a favorite nature place, uh, and you can close your eyes and you can see it, you can smell it, you can taste it, you could touch it, you can feel what it's like to be there. Just that practice, and that can be the place, that can be a person, it can be a pet, it can be a song. Any of those kind of things can bring some calm, because when we're heightened as high as the nervous system can go, meditation is really difficult, and nothing's wrong with you. That's your mind reacting to the anxiety in your body and trying to figure out what the problem is. Because if the problem's not right in front of you, but your body feels like there's a problem, our mind is super good at creating problems and being like, oh, it must be that, it must be that, it must be that. And then it bing, 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 bing. So I don't know if that helped answer the question, but
Beautiful. It's
that's what I would
beautiful.
recommend. And that there's nothing wrong with you. Like even the term fix, and I like Dr. Perlmutter, I like his work. Um, I personally don't use the word fix when I'm talking to people, because nothing's broken, nothing's wrong with them. And I learned that you mentioned Gabor in my introduction, that I've worked with Gabor Mate and trained with him, and it's been cool over the last 5 years to where I can just name drop him and people know who he is. Where 5 years ago it was a little bit less, but he's been on the forefront of merging those two sides together for quite a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a big hammered home point during his training that I've been through, that you're not here to fix anyone because nobody's broken. And
Mhm.
if all you do is help them know that, that's that's a lot.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that really stuck with me.
Mm. Wonderful, wonderful. Let's stop and highlight and underscore something for our participants who I thank for joining us. I don't think the importance of this can be overstated. What Michael just illuminated for us is this issue that part of what happens in Western industrialized society is this what my dad would have called the John Wayne approach, sort of shoot your way out alone of a tough situation. And I think we could go on for days just about where that came from. But if we just cut to the chase, we can compare and contrast that to Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. And a really interesting aspect of the hero's journey is about halfway through this whole set of Jungian transformations that a person on the hero's journey takes. And this was shared with me by a dear friend years ago. We end up alone in a cave, and at some point, our you know horses died, and the bridges have fallen into the chasm. We're not going back to the village the same way we left. That's for sure. Then we're thirsty, and our armor's dented. So So what this dear friend pointed out is that that's when a guide shows up to be with us. And what a great relief it is then to hear from an expert that when we feel this way, when we're experiencing this flooding and overwhelm, then the mission critical navigational and transformative tool is to connect with someone or something that creates this phenomenon. And I'm sure now our audience is going to say, I want that, I want that, I need that, I need that. And so I don't want to bury the lead here. We're going to be talking about something you're doing called Anima, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's launching now, where you're
Mm-hmm.
creating a platform for people to do this work. So you are addressing this need at this step in your career. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's going to be in progress for a little bit longer before this or after this airs, but
Mm-hmm.
it's underway.
Mm-hmm.
Because as your audience is pretty familiar with Joe, and Joe and I co-founded another platform called Rebel Health Tribe about 10 years ago, and I'm still
Mm-hmm.
working on that, and that's more of the
Mm-hmm.
functional medicine side. So I am in a transitionary
Mm-hmm.
phase, and I do want to create, or I am creating a platform and a community for that kind of work, and I'm doing it really intentionally. So it's taking a little bit longer. I've always tried to create something as fast as I can when I think of it, and the practices that I've learned and the trainings I've been in the last few years have helped me see that that's not the most effective way for me to do things. And so I'm going slower with this one and doing things more intentionally. And that connection aspect of healing is so overlooked. And the lack of connection as a driver of chronic disease, not just physical disease, but I mean, people know that isolation and loneliness causes mental health problems. Like that's pretty well established. But it's also one of the number one all cause morbidity in physical disease is loneliness and having a lack of connection. I'll give a shout to my friend James Maskell, who does a lot of work now in group medicine and trying to push a group model of healing into functional medicine. And he's dropped study after study after study, even wrote a book on it, that a lack of connection drives physical disease as much as smoking or eating processed food or sedentary lifestyle and all the rest of those. People hear, oh yeah, smoking's bad for you, of course. Or, oh yeah, if I eat McDonald's every day, I'm probably not going to be in very good health. But they don't realize that our physiology is wired for connection. Like when children don't have that, their development is stunted, and we have lifelong problems of anxiety and depression and nervous system dysregulation, autoimmunity, all these things. And our society, the US, is probably like the world champion of rugged individualism, like you mentioned, John Wayne. And the I didn't realize how drastic it is until I moved to Europe, and I live in Italy, and Italy's pretty well known for the food, but also for longevity. Like they know that Italians live, I think right now it's about 10 years is the life expectancy difference between Italy and the US. And so when I got here, I thought, oh, they must be really fit. They must do all these healthy things. Way more Italians smoke than Americans. They eat dinner 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, which you're not supposed to do. I'll put in air quotes. They drink wine quite a bit. They're up really late. Breakfast often consists of a coffee, a pastry, and for half the people, a cigarette. And so I'm thinking, what's the sauce here? And it's a lower stress level, better work-life balance, and a lot more social connection.
Mhm.
And Joe and I were both part of the Human Longevity Project film series 5 or so years ago. And that's what they found when they went around the world and filmed everywhere. And we were looking for like the secret diet sauce that we could like put together, the longevity diet, or the what workouts do they do, or what, I don't know,
Mhm.
coming from the functional medicine mind. And the things
Mhm.
that all these centenarians were telling our interviewer was, I don't hold grudges, came up a lot.
Mhm.
Um, I don't worry about stuff that doesn't matter, and most things don't matter, came up a lot. I spend a lot of time with my family and my community and my friends, came up a lot. I spend a lot of time outside, came up a lot. And the marketers on our side were like, how do you sell that? It's like,
Mhm.
oh, you don't, but the
Mhm.
connection is the thing. And I'm not
Mhm.
going to get into like a lot of neuroscience or biochemistry, but our physical body responds in so many ways to connection or lack of connection. Because for most of our evolution, if we were not connected to others, that was it. That's the end. Like
Mhm.
you're doomed. You can't survive out there by yourself.
Mhm.
And so we evolved as connected to each other and to the natural world. And that lack of connection from the natural world, the isolation from the natural world too, is a huge driver of neurosis and like fear and anxiety. And we created there's this us and then there's that. And
Mhm.
that's a scary thing if you look at it like that. That's really big and I'm really small. But there is no us in that.
Mhm.
Like we are that.
Mhm.
And so there's a shift that happens when you start to see things more that way. But that connection, and I do want to create something like that. What I was getting at when I started talking about connection is that that's missing in the one-on-one therapy model. There's great therapists out there. There's great books. I have a lot of them on my shelf about how to feel better. There's all these kind of like self-help things, self practice, self development, throw in whatever word you can behind there. But there's a lack of support and connection. And I think I've seen things take place. A lot of the trainings I've done are taught in retreat format. So it's like an 8-day training, and you go, and that's where you are, and that's what you're doing. And the connection made at those things shifts the people participating in it as much, if not more, than what they're learning or what the practices are that they're doing.
Mhm.
So that connection aspect of it is huge. So I want to work with small groups. I want to create a community where people can connect. And a lot of people looking to do this work, whether we're talking about the trauma work and the somatic therapy and that kind of stuff, or if you're talking about I have an autoimmune disease and I want to try to get healthier, they don't have support like from their partner or their spouse or their family or their friends. They're often like the weird one that's into the healthy stuff or whatever you want to call it. And a lot of times what I saw when I was working with health clients is not only did they not have support, sometimes their partner or the people closest to them were the opposite of support and were discouraging. And so they didn't have anywhere to go or anyone to connect with that was on a similar path, that had same goals, that had on the same journey. And that can really, really make a world of difference. And that's why communities like you got, these events build community too. And Joe's platform and your podcast and like these communities, even though they're virtual and it's a little different, are still so important for people to be part of and feel part of and be seen. And it's it's
Mm-hmm.
essential.
Mm. Well, let's do some highlighting and underscoring there. There's so much beautiful stuff to unpack. And what happened when Dr. Perlmutter used that phrase is I had cornered him, right? Because I had used the goggles super glued to one's face, and I'm sure he thought it'd be helpful to everybody to use a little more humane phrase than my creepy horror show deal. And then one of my favorite
That's
songs by
accurate
Cold,
though. That's how
well,
that's how it feels when the
yeah,
anxiety
yeah,
glasses are on. You
yeah,
can't escape it.
yeah. One of my favorite songs by Coldplay is the song Fix You. And anytime I hear it, I think how beautiful the song is. And I also think to myself, what's beautiful about the song is the loving impulse to want somebody else to be whole. And then of course, as we learn the real dimensions of how this happens, it's by hearing them and showing up for them and connecting to them that the agency blossoms for them to take the steps internally to to resonate with that compassionate place we create for them by loving and accepting them. And I think that you and I may have had similar experiences in that when we've done this work for a long time, we're doing this deep dive into what actually works. And when we see the supplements and the exercise and the testing not pan out, we ask ourselves, what does this person I care about, I want for them to be whole and be at peace in the world. And I want their suffering to be something manageable. And so I just find that the part that, again, I think there's sort of this Western industrialized poison in our consciousness that we're going to get $20,000 of healing from Mayo Clinic. But if we visualize our dog, we're going to get $0 worth of healing because it costs $0 to visualize our dog. And so I'd like for folks from the Rewire sessions to go ahead and run the experiment. I really, really want them to walk away from this masterclass with tools. And I'd like them to start using the tools right away. And so I'd like them to know that the irony is there's something kind of holographic about when we think of the peace of being with our dog, or we think of being in nature, we're actually experiencing that from the perspective of the healing that happens. It doesn't matter that we're not with our dog in that moment. And so just go ahead and lean in.
Yeah, it's very easy to trick your brain. It's and it but that works both ways. So it can't tell the difference. The nervous, the body, the brain, like our detection centers of what's real and what's not are not very good at telling what's real and what's not. And then we can get into the whole more deeper discussion maybe for the plant medicine later of what's actually real or what's not. But um visualizing, I have my dog passed away. Well, I had two, and my dog that was mine passed away a few years ago. And I have a little card with his picture on my meditation table over there. And I can feel a physiological shift in my body when I sit down to meditate and I see the little card with Marley on it. And I can feel like what it felt like to have him there. And this isn't woo woo, like anyone can do this or back this up or try it. You have to really be present with it. You can't be just looking at a picture and thinking about work things or some other thing. Like you have to really be present with it. But those visualization practices that a lot of people use or talk about, like visualize yourself here or visualize this, or the people who are into the what is that called, where you like think about stuff so you can get it, law of
Mnemonic
attraction.
device. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like all that kind of stuff, or NLP or all those things. Like the brain's very easy to trick. It can't tell what's real or what's not. So if you're visualizing that thing and really dropping into it and really feeling into it, that whether it's the pet or the person or the place or the time, like an experience, like, oh, I remember walking out of school my last day of 8th grade when I finished that school, and it was summertime, and I was leaving 8th grade, and I was never going to be in that school again, and it was going to be summer forever. Because remember when you were a kid, like summer lasted forever, and now it's like 5 minutes, but it lasted forever. And I remember
Hmm.
that day, and I could, if I dropped in, like right now I'm talking about it, so I'm not really feeling it, but if I really could drop in, my body would probably react in a really similar way that it did when I was 13 years old and I walked out of that school. And we have the capability to do this. So like it's not difficult. You just need the space to do it, and you need to make it a priority. And having some help and guidance is useful, but those practices really work. And there's meditations that are guided in that way. I'm not a very visual, like I don't have a I saw this meme the other day on the internet that showed an apple, and it showed a clear apple, and then it went all the way like a little faded, a little more faded, black and white, almost not visible, not visible at all. And it was 1 to 5. And it said, when you close your eyes and try to think of an apple, what do you see? And there's different levels of how much people can actually visualize things in their mind's eye. And mine is black. I don't see anything. And all these people were ones, and they see this clear apple. I'm like, what? And then they couldn't believe that I don't see anything. They're like, how do you do? And I'm like, because I can feel an apple.
Mm.
And so there's everybody's wired
Hmm.
differently,
Hmm.
brains rewired
Hmm.
differently. And you don't have to be able to see things. I used to not do visualization stuff because they'd see, okay, now you see a white light coming in it. I'm like, dude, I see the back of my eyelids. And then I'd be checked out. But now I
Yeah.
guide people on those types of practices, and I can't see anything, but I can
Hmm.
remember stuff. Like I can
Hmm.
remember the feeling, and it's the
Mm.
body. The body remembers. I had a teacher. One of the trainings I completed was it's biodynamic breathwork and trauma release. And one of my teachers' names is Prema McKeever, and she is trained in every kind of somatic trauma therapy that there is. And she said, I've come to believe that the body is actually the subconscious mind, because the body always remembers and it always reacts. What are the terms like gut feeling, stomach punch? Like there's all these terms
Hmm.
for
Heartbroken.
physical, heartbroken, to physical reactions to mental things. And the body responds before you know what's going on. Like always, it always is the first thing to respond. You go to a place, you ever left a place because you were there and you're like, I don't really feel this place. Or there's people that you've been around that either are like, oh, I really like being around that person, then we call them charismatic, or um, you don't feel good being around that person. You can't really peg why. Where does all that stuff come from? We have what are called implicit and explicit memories. Explicit is I can remember walking out of the school. I remember what it looked like. I remember who was there. I remember that. Implicit are things I don't have any recollection of, but my body will respond when anything happens that reminds it of that incident. And that's where trauma comes into play for people. Is you fly off the handle at something, and then you look at it an hour later and you're like, that wasn't that big of a deal. Why did I freak out like that? And it's because your response to that situation didn't have anything to do with that situation.
Mm.
It's because
Hmm.
it triggered a response to a part of you that got wounded in a similar way by something else when you were younger, and it's responding like that, and it spikes your everything when it happens. And when our everythings are spiked, the mind is not clear and we act in a certain way, and then later we're like, how did that happen? And so the body remembers everything.
Mm. Well, I know
And
that this is all brilliant and just incredibly luminous. So let's when you talk, I flash on Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition from Plum Village and that type of thing. And a friend of mine who's been lay ordained in that tradition talks about Gabor Mate's work drifting into this zone of what the Zen Buddhists and Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition are doing, where there's a loving acceptance of all experience. Hello, my dear, fill in the blank,
mhm,
treating it like a precious baby, all experience. And I have found that I'm aware of dimensions in my body and experience via that compassionate engagement with that radical acceptance of what is that
Hmm.
softens a bunch of this, which then further opens up more expansive capacity to be present with my body. And these new dimensions are finally emerging intuitively rather than reading a book or hearing somebody else's program. I just had this aha moment the other day in drifting toward a leaner body mass index, which I perceive as a manifestation of embodying what I'm surrounded by. These last pounds of the visceral adipose tissue, the VAT, those seem to be persisting, and I realized that hunger triggers this neurotransmitter drop, which my body and consciousness conflate with those feelings of inadequacy from my childhood, which then gets conflated with being not good enough and shame. And I've finally done the whole thing in real time for long enough to be able to say, hello, my dear. Hello, my precious hunger. Come sit by my fire. Hello, my dear. Hello, my precious insecurity. Come sit by my fire. And it seems to me this sort of what the Buddhists would call, the clear light of consciousness has a place for all these things to be, all these parts.
Hmm.
And then I just find that I'm in my body, and new things happen that I really love. And that's one of the things that I want for our participants is to explore your work further and programs and walk away with some tools just so that right away they can start to experience some of these things. But I think this compassionate acceptance of all of these parts and this leaning in, this is what opens up these new doors and dimensions of processing.
Absolutely. The compassion is the key. And we judge we judge ourselves very harshly. And I'm not projecting that on anyone else. I just that's a generalized statement about people in modern society. And I was actually surprised. I sent a survey out when I was hosting a workshop a few months ago in California, and I said, "What's the number one, or what do you struggle with the most?" And I listed all these things that I thought people who would be interested in coming to my workshop struggled with. And at the last minute, I added one on um, that was a harsh inner critic, because I don't really have that, and I do to an extent, but it's not my lead thing. And
Mm,
that crushed the survey. Like it was 2/3 of the responses were harsh inner critic.
mm,
And because where did they learn that? How were they spoken to as a child? How were they spoken to in school? How were they spoken to by their guardians, their caretakers? Where did they? Everything we learned somewhere. And so the compassion aspect of it is, and so Gabor's, and I don't mean to just keep dragging him into this, but Gabor's training is called compassionate inquiry, and the compassion is the lead. Because if, as the practitioner, if you judge anything that comes out of a session from an individual that you're working with, that is over. Then you can't help that person anymore. And helping them realize all the times that they judge themselves and that they judge certain emotions or certain responses they have as bad, especially when triggered. Oh, I'm feeling shame, or I'm feeling inadequate, or I'm feeling angry, or we have all these in our culture, these unsafe grief, sadness. Can't have that. Don't want to make anybody uncomfortable, so we put those away in the corner. Except they don't go away, and they don't go into the corner. And Jung talked about it a lot, that anything that we put away actually gets a lot stronger and a lot bigger and a lot more fierce. And then when it does get a little inch to stick its head out, it's a monster. Like then it becomes this huge thing. It's like putting a kid in a, locking in a room, like go to your room kind of thing. Like that was my discipline as a kid, was go to your room and you can't come out of your room. And the rage that would build up when I was like not allowed to leave a place, and the same thing happens with these parts of us that have these responses that at one point were essential for us or for our survival. And we learned I need to make sure everybody around me is happy so that my environment is safe. And then you grow up to become a people pleaser and people walk all over you and you don't say no to anything. And then you think like, oh, I'm this doormat of a person and I da 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 da. And it's like, well, where did you learn that? Why do you do that? And you can help people get to that how you did it yourself. You figured out the pathway from the hunger ping to the inadequacy to the shame. People need sometimes a little reflection, but they already know. Like everybody can do that, what you just said that you did. Like that's everyone can do that. I don't do anything for anyone. I just try to create the space for them to see it themselves and ask them questions or reflections back to them that might help them see their own parts and their own pattern. And seeing those parts with compassion takes them out of the shadow and brings them into the light. And having gratitude to them for what they did and how they helped you survive, because that example, the people pleaser, I'll just stick with one example to make it easier to follow. They learned how to do that as a child because if they didn't make sure everybody around them was happy, their environment was unsafe. And so they would make sure this was cleaner, that was like this, or when dad gets home from the bar, make sure his remote controls on the armrest of the chair so that it's by the TV so that he doesn't get angry, like that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. And a lot, I mean, I've heard things now with people that it breaks your heart. Like it's really, really hard to hear. A lot of times that they've never said out loud or that they've never realized. And when they realize that, oh, I do that because that,
Hmm.
then it's not this monster that makes them do this thing. It's a little kid who learned how to survive. We turned it into the monster. There is no monster. There's never a monster. Like whatever you're scared of that's inside you, people don't want to do therapy or they don't want to, you mentioned I don't facilitate medicine work, but like people don't want to explore psychedelic therapy or like those kind of things, or they don't want to do breath work or they don't want to do meditation because they're scared of the monster that lives in the dark, like these things that they'll find out about themselves or whatever things. At least I'll speak for myself. I was scared of that. And I've been scared of it over and over as there's new layers. And every time I've gotten to the monster, it
Hmm.
there's no monster. It's just a little kid that wants to be hugged.
Yeah, I don't think we're speaking for others if we've worked with thousands of people over many, many years and we see these narrative motifs. Again, they're like these Jungian archetypes.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
we've
It's
seen the motif over and over again, it's important to share that a lot of folks start their work with us and one of their constructs is linear. They're coming in and
mm,
saying, I want to be whole. And if you ask me to lean into the monster, I'm just going to be shredded little bloody bits on the floor. That's my linear
yeah,
projection of what's next.
yeah.
And I think the reason Joseph Campbell seeing that all cultures have this hero's journey, this journey of consciousness, which all of us
Mm-hmm,
who engage on the path of the spirit which is unified with
mm-hmm,
our path to wholeness as a physical body,
mm-hmm.
they're all
Yeah, yeah.
hardwired in
There's no
together.
sides.
uh, I think that though, and that's why fairy tales are weird because things morph. That what fairy tales do is each step of the story morphs in this weird way, and some part of us says, "I get that. That's actually how our journey works. Is that this turns into that, and then there's this hard left turn, and then the castle turns into a moat, and then the river turns into a lake, and then there's a knight, and at the end there's a queen, and whoa, what's going on there?" And so the trust, I think, to be present with someone safely and say, yeah, let's just say, hello, my dear monster. I'm there for
Yeah, and
you.
they might need to work towards that. Like, I don't want to give the impression that these massive transitions or changes or healing moments or returning to wholeness, whatever kind of language you want to use, I don't want to give the impression that in like 1 hour that you can just snap your fingers and everybody can just have these experiences. It's sometimes you need to build trust. Like I've also trained some in internal family systems, which is Dick Schwartz modality that works with parts specifically. It's like internal parts, and you work with them as if they are children right in front of you, and you can talk to them, you can work with them, and we develop what he calls, in that model calls, protectors, and they usually come out with anger. You snap at things, or snap in situations, or jump at people, and kind of are reactionary. That's never the core wounding. That's never the You learned to do that to protect a younger, more damaged, vulnerable, sad, usually part that he calls an exile. But usually, those protectors are the ones who keep your walls up, the ones who don't trust the therapist or the counselor or the coach or the doctor or the person that's trying to help you, or the person you meet, or you go on a date and you have quote, you say, I have trust issues, and I'll put that in quotes for people who are listening and not watching. um, you learned when you were young that trusting people wasn't safe. That gets to be unlearned, and so that process can take time. And so sometimes we have these parts that do protect, and you get to build that rapport and that safety and that connection. And I don't know where the quote originally came from, but there is one that floats around in that space that says that um, any wounding or damage that happened in relation must be healed in relation. We can't heal something that was done by other people ourself entirely. We get to learn to trust connection and people again. And so, yes, we can sit and work with people to find those monsters, but sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes, revisiting and going little bits and little bits, because the little kid that's scared of strangers and a bunch of strangers come to the house, they're going to hide over there until
Mhm,
they kind of peek
mhm,
out a little bit,
mhm,
and then it's okay to peek out a little bit, and then they'll peek out a little bit more, and then they come out. But
mhm, mm,
I like to
yeah,
set realistic expectations, so it's being consistent with the safety.
yeah. Yeah, well, let's just keep doing this highlighting and underscoring, because I think this process that's sort of organically emerged during today's discussion is working really well. And I think the things that we're explicating potentially have a lot of value to folks. And it's no surprise that part of what is very disillusioning for folks in the conventional medical experience is this prescriptive, just do this, fill in the blank, just take this pill, just have this procedure, etc. And part of what is scary about it is this intuitive sense that the whole dimensions of the self, the lack of attunement by the person, it's prescriptive, it's not an invitation. And so I'm learning this for myself. I'm learning how to do this for my patients. This is the next step in what I would hope is a desire to a goal, to try to get into the mastery domains of facilitating healing. And so it can't be stated enough that being safe and drifting back into the safety, if there's this feeling of this doesn't feel right, I don't feel safe doing this, there's something intimidating about it. Rule number one in clinical medicine is do no harm. So if I were to say to the person, you have to confront this monster to move forward, I'm wrong footing the whole thing. It's an invitation to say,
Yeah.
start from
Hmm.
your safe place. I honor you. I revere you. I hear you. That's the entirety of the work. And if I invite you
Yeah.
to take a look at this and you internally feel a sense of resonance with this process, trust it, lean in a little and see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, drift back to your safe space and send yourself that message too. I think Dr. Keisha, who I heard you invoke as I was reviewing some of your work, as one of the first people in the Institute for Functional Medicine space, I thought it was brilliant that she creates a safe space to do EMDR. And then, no surprise, also, she's such a fierce light warrior. When I got to interview her, be interviewed by her, she challenged me in real time to create my safe space with everybody watching the experience, seeing me
Mhm.
articulate where that was and what color it was and how it smelled and how it sounded and how it felt in my body. And I thought, okay, now we're getting there. Now it's all coming together.
Yeah, I love Keisha. She's great. She was one of the first ones talking about any of this in the functional medicine world, and everybody thought she was a little out there. And now people are like, "Can you come back and talk about that again?" And so, yeah, that say you mentioned, I don't know the exact exercise she took you through, but creating that safety, and you mentioned, giving an invitation, the prescription versus the invitation. I don't ever tell anybody to do anything. I'm not here to give people instructions or advice or tips, or like, I listen. I create the space for them to feel safe, and I might ask them some questions that may lead them towards discovering some things about themselves. But it's always an invitation. It has to be like the wall that's been put up between doctor and patient, or therapist and client, or psychiatrist and patient, or anything. I've been in, I don't know, 4 now in the last 6 years, pretty intensive trainings on the mental emotional trauma side. And at first I had a complex around it because I'm not a therapist. And a lot of my co-students were therapists, especially in Gabor's training. Like 80% of the people in my cohort were therapists, some of which with 25 years, 30 years experience. And then Gabor's really caught on. He breaks all the rules even within like traditional therapy and psychology. Like they get upset with him just like the medical community used to when he would say people could get cancer because they have unresolved trauma. Um, Conventional therapy gets upset with him because he advocates attunement and self-disclosure with your clients. Like, oh, I'm familiar with that too because that happened to me. I understand that because I know what that feels like because I had this thing happen. And I've always been like that as I've done any of this work. I'm an open book. I always share stuff about myself. And I didn't realize that what I was doing was helping people feel safer around me. And in medical school, and you're an MD, and I wasn't at your medical school, but my wife's a nurse, was an ER nurse, and I have a lot of friends that have been through medical school and nursing. And there's
Mhm.
a wall here. They don't, and
Mhm.
then therapists, like, they don't even use their real name on the internet for like social media because they can't allow their clients or their patients to like find their social media. They don't let
Mhm.
them know anything about them. Most people don't know if their therapist is like married or has kids or grew up where or had what life experience, because there's this hierarchy that's created there. The doer and the receiver of the work, and Gabor challenges that. And step 1 and 1A in the compassionate inquiry process and program is attunement with the client. And that is syncing your nervous system. That is co regulation. That is helping them feel seen and heard. That is creating that connection in that space. And after the first few training sessions we had, I had already been through a 2-year training where that's the primary thing, is energetic attunement. And I went through an in-depth training at a place called the Luminous Awareness Institute. And that's what we did for almost 2 years, was learn how to energetically attune to someone. There was more than that, but that's what it distilled down to.
Mhm.
And I had a couple people from my cohort who, when we first started the CI training with Gabor, I was like, oh man, what am I doing in the room with these 2 therapists who have 25 years of experience? I had like imposter syndrome. I'm just some guy that's here. And they sent me a joint message and they said, hey, you're really good at this attunement thing. Do you think you might be willing to do a Zoom with us and meet with us outside of the class to like help us do this? Because we don't really get it, but we watch when you work with people, the emotions come right away, or the thing
Yeah.
comes right away, or the whatever comes
Mhm.
right away. And people
Mhm.
seem hesitant with us. And I don't even get that with my therapy clients. So we don't know what we're doing wrong. Can
Mhm.
you tell us or help us? So I actually did these like side sessions with very experienced therapists, where all I did was sat there and connected with them, because it's not something you can teach, just do it. So they
Mhm.
wanted like steps, they wanted like step 1 to attune to
Mhm.
somebody, step 2, step 3.
Mhm.
And I just sat there with them, and they're like, wow, that's really nice. I was like, yeah, you could do that with your clients. They're like, whoa, we're not supposed to do that with our clients. And I said, I bet you the therapy sessions will go better if you do.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that is the invitation. Like,
Mhm.
oftentimes at the beginning of these sessions, and I know it's getting a little long-winded, I'm going to get to a point here, is um, as soon as that connection is made and that space is created and that safety is there and there's no judgment and it's just authentic connection, I've seen, like, a lot of times, not just in my sessions, but in sessions I've witnessed, or I teach, I've taught a little now at a couple of the places, and like helped with students. And there's emotions that will come
Mhm.
immediately
Mhm.
when the space is there. Nothing even needs to be said. Like, I've had people sitting across from me before a breathwork session, before we even start breathing, and they just look at me and the tears start coming and they'll say, I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm crying. And I say, well, it doesn't matter. And you
Mhm.
don't have to be sorry. Like, there's
Mhm.
no sorry, there's no reasoning. It doesn't, just let it. What are you feeling right now? And then they'll follow that. And we didn't even start breathing yet. And that happens because the connection and the space is there. And they might have been waiting to cry those tears since they were 6 years old, because we won't do that if the space and the connection and the safety isn't present. We won't. The body won't allow it. Like, it won't come. It's like the wall is up, and the wall won't come down unless it's safe for the wall to come down.
Mhm.
Does
So
that
beautiful.
make sense, or was that just
Oh,
a
so beautiful.
wild
Oh, it's
rant?
no, it's
Okay.
radiantly articulate and clear. And so, as the person trying to create this space for you to share your wisdom, I'm gonna wrap it up there today because we can't do justice to
Sure.
the blue zones or plants. But more importantly, this just came full circle, and what you just articulated and encapsulated to my way of experiencing and thinking, and wanting to again invite people into these dimensions, that way of showing up for ourselves and others with compassion and the energetic connection and the attunement to open up so those lotuses start coming out of the mud of our suffering. I mean, there is nothing more beautiful or important. So I think that's a perfect place to bring it full circle today. Where
Sure,
can people
sure.
find you, Michael?
Thank you. And I love that you mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh also. I have 3 of his books on the shelf behind me, and he's one of my favorite teachers in the softness and subtlety and gentleness that he teaches some, like, really deep and heavy stuff. He teaches it with such, like, a lightness and ease that it makes it accessible. I am in between things, like I mentioned at the beginning, but for the functional medicine side of things and the health side, I run Rebel Health Tribe, which is a platform where you can find a lot of functional medicine education and a little bit beyond. And then Anima is my new brand, my new business. The website is animasomaticself.com. We have Facebook and Instagram should be up by the time this goes live, but there might not be much there yet. The website does have a sign up for waiting list for when the offers are coming and when the groups are going live, which will be later this year in 2024. And yeah, I'm pretty active on Facebook, just my own name and self. You could find me on there and talk to me there. So I'm in a big transitionary moment right now that's been 5 or 6 years in the making. Like, I think it was before we hit record, I didn't say yes to interviews for a number of years. And now that I'm switching, I am. And this is one of the first times I've talked about some of this stuff. So I hope that it was helpful for you and
Mm,
for people to hear.
remarkable. Yeah, I'll close it the way Dr. Keisha closed with me. Thank you for sharing a fraction of your wisdom. It's an incredible gift, an incredible privilege.
Thank you for the platform and the opportunity, and thanks for putting together what you and Joe are creating. It's a great lineup. When I saw it and he sent it to me, I was like, man, you're putting together a fantastic resource for people here. And I think that the brain and the nervous system is going to be the next focus in functional medicine and the next
Mm,
evolution and where we look on how to help people regain their health, because it's so intricately involved in pretty much every process of health or disease. So it's going to be a
mm,
huge resource. So thank you.
mm. Well, thanks for your kind words. You and I both know when we illuminate some space with the heart of service, then the universe often provides quite a cast of characters.
Very true. I've been fortunate a lot of times in producing things as well that oh, you should talk to this person, or hey, I know a person, and then it ends up like, wow, okay. The thing creates itself most of the time. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but it's the same as a therapy session, man. You got to just open the space for it.
Mm,
It's the
absolutely.
same thing. So
Well,
thanks,
have
Dr.
a
Rob. This was super fun.
oh, delighted to hear it. Have a great rest of your yeah, I don't know what part of the cycle you're in Italy, but whatever's next.
Evening.
Have a nice evening.
It's evening. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for joining us for the Seaworthy podcast. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. If you think we've earned it, please consider giving this podcast a like, subscribing, and giving us a 5-star rating on the platform of your choice. Thanks.